No one could ever survive in the conditions that Roman soldiers survived in. All the power, splendor, and order of Rome were built by the hands of one man, the Roman legionnaire. We are used to seeing him as a warrior clad in steel, invincible and formidable. But his real life was far from the glamour of parades and triumphs. It consisted of sweat, calluses, and endless, exhausting work, where a shovel was as important a weapon as a sword. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn why every legionnaire was not just a soldier, but a professional builder, engineer, and loader, and what invisible enemy took more lives than the swords of the barbarians. I will reveal the best-kept secret. It was not the strongest who were recruited into the legion, but the most enduring. Candidates who wanted to devote their lives to serving Rome underwent a rigorous selection process that weeded out those who were weak in spirit and body. It was not just recruitment into the army, but entry into an elite club, a ticket to which was very expensive. Imagine the modern procedure for joining elite military units such as Special Forces or the Marines. The Roman selection process for the legions was even tougher, as each soldier was required not only to fight, but also to be a versatile specialist. If you decided to join the Roman legion, you would face a selection system that assessed not only your ability to wield a sword, but also your ability to build a bridge, lay a road, and survive in any conditions for a quarter of a century. The selection procedure was multi-stage and could take weeks. Candidates underwent not only a medical examination, but also a series of practical tests designed to reveal their real capabilities under stress. Roman recruiters understood that anyone could be taught to fight, but endurance and character were either present or absent. First, doctors assessed the physical condition of the recruit. The ideal height was considered to be at least 175 centimeters, with a strong build, sharp eyesight, and good hearing. Any physical defect could be a reason for rejection, because legionnaires had to endure enormous stress. But physical fitness was only half the battle. The candidates' skills were of great importance. Carpenters, blacksmiths, bricklayers, surveyors. Such specialists were worth their weight in gold, because the legion was not only an army, but also a huge construction organization. Medical examinations were conducted with scientific thoroughness that was astonishing for the time. Doctors checked the condition of the teeth, as bad teeth could put a soldier out of action on a campaign where there were no dentists. They examined the feet for flat feet or other deformities that would make long marches impossible. They tested coordination and reaction by making candidates perform various physical exercises. Particular attention was paid to the psychological stability of the candidate. Experienced centurions were able to recognize signs of cowardice, instability, or a tendency to desert. They conducted interviews of sorts, finding out the motives for joining the legion, family status, and personal history. People who were too emotional or unstable were eliminated at this stage. After successfully passing the selection process, the recruit took an oath, sacramentum. He swore allegiance to the emperor in Rome, pledging to obey orders unquestioningly and never leave service without permission. From that moment on, his past life ceased to exist. He received a mark on his hand confirming his new status. It was not a mark of shame, but a source of pride, a symbol of belonging to an invincible military machine. Now he was not just a citizen, but part of something bigger. The swearing-in ceremony was solemn and symbolically rich. The recruits stood before the altar surrounded by the legion's banners, and their words of oath were repeated in unison, creating a powerful psychological effect. The text of the oath included not only obligations to the emperor, but also vows of comradeship, mutual aid, and willingness to die for Rome. The branding procedure was painful, but was considered an honor. The mark was burned onto the left arm with a special brand bearing the symbols of the legion. This brand served not only as identification, but also as protection against desertion. A fugitive legionnaire could be identified by this mark anywhere in the empire. Training was grueling and brutal. Recruits were forced to march for miles with full gear, trained in fencing with heavy wooden swords, and taught the basics of drill. The goal was not simply to teach them how to fight, but to turn a motley crowd into a unified, coordinated mechanism. They were taught not only to fight, but also to build. Every recruit had to be able to dig trenches, erect fortifications, and build roads. It was these skills and not just swordplay that made the Roman army invincible. The training program lasted several months and was structured like a modern training course. In the morning, recruits studied drill and the basics of tactics. In the afternoon, they practiced weapon skills, and in the evening, they did engineering work. Each day included physical exercises designed to develop the endurance and strength necessary for service. Particular emphasis was placed on collective action. Recruits learned to move in formation as a single unit, to execute commands instantly, and to support their comrades in any situation. Individual skill was important, but even more important was the ability to function as part of a larger mechanism. In essence, Rome was not looking for individual heroes, but for ideal cogs for its military machine. A soldier had to be resilient, disciplined, and versatile. Only such a person could endure all the hardships of service. After passing all the tests, the recruit became a full-fledged legionnaire. He received his first salary and a place in the centurion. But this was only the beginning of a long and difficult journey lasting 25 years. The moment of receiving the first salary was especially significant. It symbolized the transition from the status of a candidate to a full member of the legion. The new legionnaire received not only money, but also a full set of equipment, which became his responsibility for the entire service. Assignment to a specific centuria determined his immediate environment and comrades for years to come. Inclusion in a centuria was not just an administrative procedure, but an entry into a military family. Experienced soldiers took the newcomer under their wing, teaching him the intricacies of service that were not taught in the official training course. This informal knowledge often proved to be no less important for survival than the official instructions. We are very interested in hearing your opinion. What do you think about this approach to selection, where civilian skills were valued as much as military training? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how much a Roman soldier's standard kit actually weighed? Every day, a legionnaire carried not just armor and weapons, but the weight of the entire Roman Empire. The total weight of the equipment he was required to carry during a campaign reached 45 kilograms. Imagine a modern tourist complaining about a heavy 15-kilogram backpack during a one-day hike. Roman legionnaires carried 3 times that weight every day for decades of service, while remaining combat-ready and setting up camp upon arrival. If you tried to spend even a week with such a load, you would understand that Roman military service was primarily a test of physical endurance that exceeded the capabilities of most modern people. To understand the scale of the load, it is worth considering that 45 kilograms was about 60–70% of the soldier's own weight. This meant that a legionnaire carried a load comparable to the weight of another person. Such a load required not only exceptional physical training, but also special techniques for walking, breathing, and distributing weight throughout the body. The basis of this load was the so-called sarcina, a marching pack fastened to a T-shaped pole. It included personal belongings, a supply of provisions for several days, a mess tin, a flask, and tools. The legionnaire carried this pole on his shoulder throughout the entire march. In addition to their personal belongings, each soldier carried the tools needed for the entire unit. These could be a pickaxe, shovel, basket for soil, or saw. The legion was a self-sufficient army, and everything necessary for life and construction had to be carried with them. The design of the sarcina was the result of centuries of evolution and engineering thought. The T-shaped pole distributed the weight so that the main load was on the shoulder and back, rather than the arms. This allowed the legionnaire to maintain freedom of movement and readiness for battle even under such a heavy load. The system of straps and fastenings was so well thought out that soldiers could quickly drop their load in the event of a sudden attack. Each item in the sarcina had a strictly defined place and purpose. The mess tin was used not only for cooking, but also as additional head protection in extreme cases. The flask was designed to hold a daily ration of water with a small reserve. Tools were selected based on the soldier's specialization and the needs of the unit. Experienced sappers carried more complex equipment than ordinary infantrymen. Add to this the weight of the weapons themselves: a helmet, armor, a large rectangular scutum shield, a short gladius sword, and a pugio dagger. All of this together made up a significant part of the load. Each item was well thought out and functional, but together they created a serious burden. Legionnaire footwear, caligae, was a marvel of military engineering. These were sturdy sandals with thick soles reinforced with iron nails. They provided excellent traction and lasted a long time, but long marches still turned feet into one big callus. The weight of individual pieces of equipment was carefully calculated to balance protection and mobility. The helmet weighed about 2 kilograms, the lorica segmentata 15-20 kilograms, the scutum 10 kilograms, and the gladius with its sheath 1.5 kilograms. It might not seem like much, but when you add up all the gear, it put a huge strain on the soldier's musculoskeletal system. Caligae with iron spikes weighed significantly more than ordinary shoes, but provided unmatched mobility on any terrain. The iron studs were arranged in a specific order to ensure optimal traction and even weight distribution. However, constantly wearing such heavy footwear led to foot deformities and chronic leg pain in veterans. The daily march in full uniform was about 30 kilometers. At an accelerated pace, this distance could almost double. This required superhuman endurance and willpower from the soldiers. Such a load was part of the system. It weeded out the weak and made the rest incredibly resilient. A legionnaire capable of covering such distances daily with a huge load was ready for any challenge. The pace of the march was strictly regulated and was about 5 kilometers per hour for a normal march. An accelerated march required a speed of up to 7 to 8 kilometers per hour, which with such a load became a real test of endurance. Stops were made every 2 hours for 10-15 minutes, but this time was barely enough to catch one's breath and drink some water. The physical training system was built precisely on such loads. Recruits started with less weight and gradually increased the load, developing not only muscle strength, but also the endurance of the cardiovascular system. By the end of their training, they had to withstand the full load without visible strain. The weight of the equipment was not just a physical burden, but a symbol of the Legion's autonomy. The soldiers did not depend on supply trains and could operate away from supply bases. They carried their world with them, ready at any moment to build a fortress on enemy soil. Modern reenactors who try to repeat the Legionnaire's forced march admit that it is an incredibly difficult test. Even for a trained person, walking such a distance with such weight is a task that borders on the impossible. And for Roman soldiers, it was a daily routine. Experiments by modern historians and athletes show that even physically fit people experience serious difficulties when trying to replicate the Roman march. After just a few days of such exertion, pain appears in the back, knees, and feet. The muscles do not have time to recover, which leads to fatigue and reduced performance. Roman legionaries adapted to such loads through years of training and service. Their bodies were restructured at the cellular level. Bone density increased, muscles adapted to such loads developed, and the cardiovascular system improved. But even for them, service left indelible marks in the form of chronic diseases of the musculoskeletal system. But what was scarier? The weight of the armor or the weight of the tools that the legionnaire carried with him? In the next chapter, you will learn why every soldier was also an engineer and what secret weapon allowed Rome to conquer the world without a single battle. What I am about to show you was Rome's main secret weapon, and it was not the sword. The real strength of the legions was their ability to erect an impregnable, fortified camp at the end of each day's march. This routine but vital procedure transformed the army on the march into an invulnerable fortress. Imagine a modern army that builds a full-fledged military base with a defense system every evening, then completely dismantles it in the morning and moves on. The Roman legions did just that every day for centuries of conquest. If you commanded an army opposing Rome, you would understand the hopelessness of the situation. The enemy was never vulnerable, always behind fortifications, and could choose the time and place for battle. This system gave the Romans a tremendous psychological advantage. Enemies saw an impregnable fortress rise before their eyes in a matter of hours and realized that they were dealing not with an ordinary army, but with an incredibly organized military machine. The very fact that the legions were able to create fortifications out of nothing had a demoralizing effect even before the fighting began. As soon as the legions stopped for the night, work began. Special engineers and surveyors quickly marked out the ideal rectangle for the future camp on the ground. The plan was standard, and every soldier knew his place and his task. The work proceeded with incredible speed and coordination. While one part of the legionnaires stood guard, the rest took up shovels and pickaxes. First, a moat was dug around the perimeter of the camp. The process of marking out the camp was perfected and based on mathematical principles. The chief engineer determined the central point of the future camp, from which all other measurements were taken. Special tools were used, squares for constructing right angles and measuring chains for accurately measuring distances. The dimensions of the camp were calculated based on the size of the legion, but the proportions remained unchanged. Standardization was a key element of the system. Regardless of the terrain and circumstances, Roman camps always had the same layout. The main street, the Via Principalis, ran through the center of the camp, intersecting with the Via Praetoria. The gates were always located in the same places, and the commanders' tents were placed in strictly defined areas. This standardization allowed any legionnaire to instantly find his way around an unfamiliar camp. The excavated earth was used to form a rampart on the inner side of the moat. This was hard physical work that required strength and endurance after a long march. Each soldier had to dig and carry a certain amount of earth. A palisade of sharpened stakes, which each legionnaire carried with him, was erected on top of the rampart. These stakes, pila muralia, turned the earthen rampart into a serious obstacle for any enemy. The camp became virtually impregnable. The moat was usually about 3 meters deep and 4 to 5 meters wide. These were impressive dimensions, considering that all the work was done by hand in a few hours. The moat had a V-shaped profile with steep walls, which made it practically impassable without special equipment. The excavated earth was not simply piled up, but carefully compacted to form a dense and stable rampart. Each legionnaire carried 2 pointed stakes about 1.5 meters long. These stakes were not just sticks, but specially treated engineering structures with iron tips and prongs. They were installed at a certain angle, creating a multi-layered system of obstacles. Even if the enemy crossed the moat, the palisade was a serious obstacle. Inside the camp, tents were pitched in strict order, forming straight streets. The centurion's tent, headquarters, and altar were always located in the same places. This standardization allowed soldiers to navigate perfectly in any camp, even one built a few hours ago. The whole process took only a few hours. By sunset, a full-fledged military base, protected by a moat, rampart, and palisade, had sprung up in an empty space. At night, soldiers could sleep peacefully under the protection of these fortifications. The internal layout of the camp was thought out to the smallest detail. Tents were set up in rows, forming a regular grid of streets about 6 meters wide, enough for people and carts to move freely. In the center was the praetorium, the commander's and headquarters tent, surrounded by the tents of the tribunes and senior officers. The altar for sacrifices and the legion's banners were located in the main square. The water supply and sanitation system was also taken into account in the layout. Latrines were located on the leeward side of the camp, and kitchens and food stores were located in specially designated areas. Each unit had its own sector, which ensured order and discipline even in a temporary camp. This tactic gave the Romans a huge advantage. They were never caught off guard. Unlike many of their opponents, they did not spend the night in the open field, but were always under the protection of their own fortress. In the morning, the camp was dismantled just as quickly, and the legion continued on its way. All that remained of yesterday's fortress was a moat and a rampart, a silent witness to the presence of Roman power. This ability to create and destroy fortresses at will demoralized their enemies. The procedure for dismantling the camp was as organized as its construction. At the signal of a trumpet, the soldiers simultaneously began to fold up their tents, gather their equipment, and partially fill in the moat. The stakes of the palisade were removed and packed away for reuse. In an hour and a half or two, there was practically nothing left of the powerful fortifications except for earthen embankments. The psychological effect of this system was enormous. Local tribes saw how the Roman army could turn any place into an impregnable fortress in a matter of hours and then disappear, leaving nothing but scars on the ground. This demonstrated the Romans' complete control over space and time, their ability to appear and disappear at will. The construction of the camp was not just a defensive measure, but also an element of discipline. It taught soldiers order, coordination, and collective labor. It was this engineering power, and not just combat training, that allowed Rome to conquer peoples and hold vast territories. What if I told you that a legionnaire's main enemy was not a barbarian, but his own centurion? Iron discipline was the foundation of the Roman army's combat effectiveness, and it was maintained by methods that today would seem excessively harsh. The centurion's authority over his soldiers was virtually absolute. The centurion was the backbone of the legion, an experienced veteran who had risen through the ranks from a simple soldier. He was responsible for the training, discipline, and morale of his centuria, a unit of 80 men. His main tool was the vitis, a rod made of grapevine which he did not hesitate to use. Any disobedience, the slightest mistake in formation, or uncleaned armor could be grounds for punishment. Corporal punishment was commonplace and was seen as an integral part of service. This created an atmosphere of constant control and tension. The most terrible punishment for an entire unit that showed cowardice was decimation. This procedure, which was resorted to in extreme cases, consisted of selecting every 10th soldier from the offending cohort by lot. The rest were forced to carry out the sentence, which had a severe psychological effect. This system was designed to suppress individuality and turn soldiers into reliable mechanisms. They had to fear their commander more than the enemy. This was the only way to force thousands of people to attack under a hail of arrows or stand to the death without retreating a single step. Discipline was evident in everything. The daily routine, the order of march, and the rules of conduct in the camp were strictly regulated. Any deviation from the regulations was punished, creating a system of total order. However, relationships were not based solely on fear. A good centurion cared for his men, knew each of them by name, and led them into battle by personal example. The respect and authority of such a commander were no less important than his baton. Soldiers of the same unit lived and served together for years, forming strong bonds of camaraderie. They endured hardships together, shared food, and covered each other in battle. This sense of solidarity was the second pillar of discipline after the commander's authority. The system worked. The Roman army was the most disciplined and controllable force of its time. Soldiers could perform complex tactical maneuvers on the battlefield, acting as a single unit. Do you think this system justified its ultimate goal of creating an invincible army? But a legionnaire's life was not all marching and punishment. In the next chapter, we will look inside his mess tin and find out what the Roman army actually ate. The staple food of the Roman army, its fuel, was grain. Each legionnaire received a regular ration consisting mainly of wheat. It was the simplest and most effective way to provide calories to a huge number of people on the march. Soldiers received grain in whole form, not as flour or ready-made bread. They had to grind it themselves on small hand mills that they carried with them. This was an additional daily duty after marching and setting up camp. The legionnaires used the flour to bake unleavened flatbread or cook porridge. Most often, they baked panis militaris, or soldier's bread, or hardtack. This hardtack was hard, but did not spoil for a long time, which was ideal for campaign conditions. The diet was extremely monotonous but nutritious. Grain provided the necessary carbohydrates to maintain strength during strenuous physical activity. However, soldiers always tried to diversify their menu. Beans, lentils, and cheese served as supplements to grain. Meat was not as common in the diet as is commonly believed. It was usually given out after a successful battle or on major holidays. One of the most important elements of the diet was pasca. It was a drink made from water mixed with wine vinegar. It not only quenched thirst, but also disinfected water of dubious quality, preventing disease. Soldiers also actively engaged in gathering and hunting, if circumstances permitted. Fruits, berries, edible roots, everything went into the common pot. This not only diversified the taste of food, but also added vitamins to the diet. Logistics and supply were key to the success of any military campaign. Rome created a complex system of warehouses and roads to ensure the smooth delivery of grain to its legions. Their combat effectiveness depended on it. Despite its apparent simplicity, the legionnaire's diet was sufficiently balanced and high in calories for his lifestyle. It allowed him to maintain the physical fitness and endurance necessary for service. However, dreams of home cooking probably never left the soldiers throughout their 25 years of service. The secret that people paid for with 25 years of their lives was stability and prospects. A Roman legionnaire was not just a conscript, but a professional on contract. Military service was hard, but it provided what many civilians could not have: a regular salary, and a secure old age. Imagine a modern world where the only way to get a guaranteed pension is to serve 25 years in the army. The Roman Empire offered just such a deal to millions of its citizens. If you lived at that time and did not have rich parents or an inheritance, military service was practically the only way to ensure a stable future. This turned the army into a social institution that attracted people not only with a thirst for glory, but also with quite practical considerations of survival. The contract system created a special psychology of military service. Unlike modern conscription, Roman legionaries knew from the outset that the army would be their home for a quarter of a century. This forced them to treat their comrades, discipline, and their own development differently. Soldiers could not afford to serve out their term. They had to build a career and establish relationships for many years to come. Soldiers received a fixed salary, which was paid 3 times a year. The amount was not huge, but it was enough for a modest life. However, the cost of food, clothing, and equipment was deducted from this money. In addition to the basic salary, there was a system of incentives. For bravery, a soldier could receive a monetary reward or a promotion. Donations were especially generous. Cash handouts from the emperor on the occasion of his accession to the throne, or a major military victory. The system of 3 monthly payments was a well-thought-out financial strategy. Receiving large sums of money several times a year rather than daily, soldiers were forced to plan their expenses and could not spend all their money at once. This disciplined them financially and forced them to think about the future. The amount of pay varied depending on rank and type of troops. An ordinary legionnaire received about 225 denarii per year, which was approximately the daily earnings of a skilled craftsman for each day of service. Praetorians received 3 times as much, and centurions received 15-20 times as much as a private. This gradation created a powerful motivation for promotion. Donatives could significantly exceed the annual salary. The new emperor usually distributed to the soldiers an amount equal to several months' salary to ensure their loyalty. After major victories, the amounts could be even greater. Each soldier's share of the spoils sometimes exceeded his annual salary several times over. Legionnaires kept all their savings in the unit treasury under the supervision of the standard-bearer. It was a kind of field banking system. Soldiers did not carry large sums of money with them, which was safer in campaign conditions. The main incentive for enduring all the hardships of service was the prospect of retirement. The term of service was 25 years. For many, it was the only chance to escape poverty and secure a decent future. The army saving system functioned as a primitive bank with compulsory savings. Soldiers could not spend all their money at once, which forced them to save. The standard-bearer kept accurate records of each legionnaire's funds, and this money was better protected than in any civilian bank of the time. The banner and treasury were guarded by the entire legion. Interest was not paid on savings, but the system protected money from inflation and theft. In addition, soldiers could make purchases on credit through army shops, which allowed them to buy necessary items even when they were temporarily short of funds. After serving the required term, a veteran received an honorable discharge and the title of evocatus. He was freed from all duties and enjoyed respect in the society. But the main thing was the material reward. As a pension, veterans received either a large lump sum payment or a plot of land. Land was particularly desirable. It allowed former soldiers to become landowners and start families. The size of the pension was impressive. The cash payment was about 12,000 denarii, which was equivalent to about 50 years' salary for an ordinary legionnaire. It was a huge sum that allowed the veteran to buy a house, land, and provide for himself for the rest of his life. An alternative was a plot of land measuring about 50 jugera, 12 hectares, enough to create a prosperous farm. Land plots were often located in fertile areas of the conquered provinces. Veterans received not only plots of land, but also houses, equipment, and sometimes even slaves to work the land. The state was interested in ensuring that former soldiers quickly settled down and became full-fledged landowners. Veterans were often settled in entire colonies in the conquered provinces. This helped keep the territories under Roman control. Former legionnaires became the backbone of Roman power in the new lands. Thus, military service was the only social ladder for many. It required enormous sacrifices, but in return offered stability and the chance for a better life. This well-thought-out system of motivation was one of the reasons for the strength of the Roman army. Veteran colonies were established throughout the empire and became centers of Romanization. Former soldiers married local women, taught local residents Roman customs and technologies, and spread the Latin language and Roman culture. Their children often became the next generation of legionaries, creating dynasties of military families. Social mobility through military service was a real opportunity to change one's destiny. The son of a poor peasant could become a centurion, obtain Roman citizenship for his entire family, and provide his children with a good education. Some veterans became local magistrates, merchants, or founded craft workshops. Was such a reward worth a quarter of a century of grueling service? But in order to live to see retirement, one first had to survive field medicine. In the next chapter, you will learn what a soldier's chances of survival were. The Roman army was one of the first in the world to create an organized military medical service. The command understood that an experienced legionnaire was a valuable resource and that his life was worth fighting for. The chances of survival after injury were significantly higher for a Roman soldier than for his opponents. Each legion had its own medical staff, or medici. These were well-trained specialists with knowledge of surgery and therapy. They were responsible for the general health of the soldiers and for providing assistance to the wounded. In addition to doctors, there were medics, or capsari. Their task was to find the wounded on the battlefield, provide first aid, and carry them to safety. Each medic had a special bag, capsa, with bandages and other supplies. Every permanent camp fortress had a valetudinarium, or military hospital. It was a well-organized institution with wards for patients, operating rooms, and rooms for storing medicines. Cleanliness and order were maintained at a high level in such hospitals. Roman surgeons used a complex set of bronze and iron instruments. Archaeologists have found scalpels, tweezers, probes, and bone saws that differ little in shape from modern ones. Doctors knew how to remove arrows and shrapnel, stop bleeding, and apply sutures. Special attention was paid to hygiene. The Romans understood the connection between cleanliness and health. The construction of aqueducts for clean water supply, baths, and sewage systems in camps was standard practice and significantly reduced the incidence of disease. Prevention was no less important than treatment. Medical personnel monitored the quality of water and food and conducted regular examinations of soldiers. A healthy soldier was a combat-ready soldier. Of course, the level of medicine at that time could not cope with serious infections. However, organization, speed of care, and attention to hygiene saved thousands of lives. The Roman army cared for its soldiers not out of humanism, but out of pragmatism, and this bore fruit. The life of a legionnaire consisted not only of marches, drills, and construction. In their rare hours of leisure, soldiers tried to distract themselves from the harsh routine and get a taste of normal life. These brief moments of rest were extremely important for maintaining morale. One of the most popular pastimes was dice. It was a game of chance, prohibited by the regulations, but officers often turned a blind eye to it. Small bone dice have been found in almost all Roman military camps. Another way to spend free time was at the baths. Baths were always built in permanent camps and fortresses. It was not just a place to wash, but a center of social life where one could relax, socialize with comrades, and unwind. Over time, civilian settlements called vici grew up near large military bases. They were home to merchants, craftsmen, and soldiers' families. In these settlements, legionnaires could spend their pay in taverns and workshops. Throughout most of the empire's history, soldiers were officially forbidden to marry during their service. However, this ban was often violated. Many legionnaires started unofficial families who lived in settlements near the camp. Relations with the local population were complicated. On the one hand, the army provided security and brought money to the region. On the other hand, the presence of thousands of armed men often led to conflicts. Within the legion itself, the main social unit was a group of 8 soldiers living in the same tent, called a contubernium. These men became like family to each other. They ate, slept, fought, and shared all the hardships of service together for many years. This close bond, esprit de corps, was the basis of the legion's cohesion. Soldiers fought not so much for the abstract idea of Rome as for their comrades on their right and left. This mutual assistance and support helped them survive the most difficult times. The Roman army was not only a force of destruction, but also a great creative force. In peacetime, when there were no major wars, the legions turned into huge construction organizations. It was the hands of soldiers that created many of the engineering marvels that we still admire today. The main task of the legions was to build roads. The network of famous Roman roads that connected the vast empire was laid mainly by the military. These roads allowed for the rapid movement of troops and goods, forming the backbone of imperial power. Soldiers built bridges, many of which were true masterpieces. The famous Caesar's Bridge over the Rhine, built in just 10 days, demonstrated to the Germanic tribes not only the military, but also the engineering power of Rome. Stone aqueducts, still standing throughout Europe, were also often built by the army. Legionnaires also built defensive structures. The greatest monument of this kind is Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a 117-kilometer-long wall built to protect against raids from the north. This grandiose project was carried out by 3 legions. The army was also involved in draining swamps, building canals, and developing mineral deposits. In essence, the legions were the main instrument for the development and Romanization of new provinces. They brought with them not only weapons, but also technology, order, and infrastructure. Such activities were beneficial from all points of view. They kept soldiers from idling, maintaining discipline and physical fitness. In addition, they greatly benefited the economy and strengthened the state. A soldier who knew how to build roads, bridges, and fortresses was much more valuable than a simple warrior. He was a bearer of civilization. It was this versatility of the legionary that was the key to the longevity and prosperity of the Roman Empire. Living for 25 years in conditions of constant physical exertion, strict discipline, and separation from home was incredibly difficult. The survival of a legionnaire depended not only on his physical strength, but also on his psychological resilience. Over time, soldiers developed a special mentality that allowed them to endure all hardships. The basis of this mentality was a sense of belonging to the elite. Legionnaires saw themselves as part of an invincible machine, citizens of the greatest empire in the world. This belief in their own superiority and the righteousness of their cause gave them enormous moral strength. Military camaraderie played a key role. The bonds formed within the contubernum and centuria were stronger than family ties. Soldiers trusted each other with their lives, and this trust was the basis of their survival. Over time, legionnaires completely broke away from their past civilian lives. The army became their only home and family. This separation was painful, but it also helped them to focus entirely on their service. Fatalism was another important trait. Soldiers understood that their lives were constantly in danger and learned to accept this fact. The ability to live for today, without looking too far ahead, helped them to stay sane. Hope for the future was of enormous importance. The prospect of an honorable retirement, receiving land or money, provided a goal that was worth enduring for. This dream of a peaceful and secure old age was a beacon that shone throughout their service. Service in the army changed a person forever. He became tougher, more disciplined, and more pragmatic. He got used to order and hierarchy and often found it difficult to adapt to the chaotic civilian life after retirement. It was this unique psychology, a blend of pride, camaraderie, and hope, that allowed the legionnaire to survive. It was as important a part of his equipment as his shield or sword. Without this inner armor, it would have been impossible to endure 25 years of service. We see that the life of a Roman legionnaire was an endless test of endurance. It was a world where heroism and individuality were not valued, but rather endurance, discipline, and the ability to be part of a huge mechanism. A soldier was a builder, a worker, an engineer, and only lastly a warrior. He carried not only a 40-kilogram load on his shoulders, but also the entire burden of building and maintaining the empire. With his hands, roads were built, cities were erected, and the borders of the civilized world were established. It was his sweat and labor, and not just victories in battle, that created the greatness of Rome. Which aspect of a Roman soldier's life? Exhausting physical labor, strict discipline, or years of separation from home, do you think was the most difficult challenge? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.